Good morning. Last month slipped by gratefully without anyone noticing my 5-year anniversary here. And I waited a full month so that none of you could say anything, so I don't like the attention, so I didn't want you to make a big deal. But 5 years, been here for 5 years. Thanks. I've known about you guys for a lot longer than 5 years. Long before I moved here, years before I even considered living in this place. I'd already heard stories about the church at 20 North Irving in Arlington. Of course, that's not a thing anymore. Now it's 3201 Arlington Boulevard, but that's a mouthful. People still call you 20 North Irving. Whether you like it or not, that's what you are, 20 North Irving. Various people who had for a time been stationed here or had come through with various government jobs, they all had a lot to say about this congregation. They told stories to me of the kindness and generosity of the people who worshiped here, the people who worshiped here long before any of you ever did. Many of the stories I heard were of soldiers who were stationed here, and they were away from home and away from comfort or familiarity. And while here, they found in the people of this congregation a bit of home. They found some hospitality and abundance. And they found that familiarity of the family of God. And though this place wasn't their home, this church was, in many ways, home away from home for lots and lots of people who have come through here and scattered abroad. Those people who came and went through this place, through this church, they carried the memory of this church and its people with them wherever they went, much to my chagrin, actually, because when you hear about the stories of 20 North Irving and you don't work at the church at 20 North Irving, it's a bit of a comparison, isn't it? I spent years of ministry hearing about how what I was doing wasn't what the church at 20 North Irving did. And it was just always this comparison of there was this church on a pedestal, not a city on a hill, but a church on a pedestal, and it was the Arlington Church of Christ, and everything else just wasn't quite that. And we all thought that was a bit crazy, but the people who had been through here, they were sure of themselves that the church on the pedestal was the one in Arlington. And they carried that memory of this church with them wherever they went. No matter how brief a time they were here, they remembered this congregation for decades to come with fondness and warmth as if they were just here yesterday. And it always impressed me when I heard those stories as I wondered what kind of church it must be to leave such a lasting impression on the souls of those who belonged in it for just a short amount of time. And what makes this phenomenon even more extraordinary is that I doubt the people who stayed here all those years, while those others were coming and going, never intended to do any of that. They never intended to leave a lasting impression on so many people. I doubt those members of this congregation woke up on a Sunday, looked at themselves in the mirror, and said, "Today is the day I leave a lasting memory of this congregation on the heart of a stranger." It doesn't work that way. Church has never worked that way. I just don't think that they acted with that level of intentionality. I do, however, believe and know for a fact that this congregation has always been intentional in hospitality and its genuine compassion and its love of strangers. To be part of this church has always inherently meant a natural affection for the family of God that sojourns through this place. It's as if knowing that you only have a brief time to love the people who are here today and the ones who are going to be gone tomorrow. And that drives this congregation to pack a lifetime of care and love into just a short amount of time. So they love fiercely and quickly to try to cram it all in. And I know this because that is how this church is described to me by those who come and go. Those from decades ago and those from months ago. The reputation of this church stands as a constant throughout time. This is a church that loves well those who stay for a little time and then move on to other places, other jobs, and other stages of life. And that's what I think of as I dwell in 1 Peter chapter 2 for the past several weeks. The passage that we read this morning covers a lot of ground and a lot of sermon material, but the one image that really stood out to me that I couldn't shake if I tried was this idea of living stones built into a spiritual house. You know the metaphor. Jesus is the cornerstone of the church, and we are individually living stones that, when you put them all together like Lincoln logs, make the church. Not the church building, but the church with a capital C, the people of God. It's a familiar enough concept. It's one that I've grown up with. I've heard that all my life, I think. And one that you've likely come to know in various forms or motivational posters. You know, it's the same concept behind a house divided cannot stand, or any sort of teamwork poster of skydivers holding hands while they fall to the earth together. It's the same idea behind any sort of you got to work together to survive mentality, this idea of coming together to make a bigger group of people that's insurmountable. It's the story and foundation of the mythos of our country. If enough people gather together through one cause, they can overcome tyrants. Pick your version of the story. 1 Peter 2 is telling you the same thing. You're all individually stones that put together make something bigger than all of you. But this time, as I sat with 1 Peter and I dwelled in the Word, I find myself asking a slightly different question than usual. What kind of building? Now, that might just be my ADD playing out somehow in reading of Scripture, and I get a little distracted and I wonder, what are we building with these Lincoln logs? What are we putting together with these stones? What kind of building is this? Now, of course, the easy answer is it's a church. It's a bit of a no-brainer, really. That's what the building is. It's a church. It's full of priests. What kind of building is that? It's a church. But that didn't seem to really satisfy the question. I truly felt that God was pushing me further to ask not only what kind of building is Peter talking about, but what type of building is this church of living stones? Not which pig built it, not if it's built out of straw or stones or wood or any of those things, not that kind of question. But how is this building, this church of living stones, to be categorized? For example, is this building of living stones some sort of historic landmark kind of building? One that's preserved the way it was a long time ago, so that people can come in and out to marvel at how life used to be back in those days? If so, does that make the church some sort of, irrelevant window in time of something that used to be but is no more? I'll admit, some days it feels that way. And some days it feels like that's how the rest of the world might see us. As if the church is just another one of those historic landmarks you drive by on the highway. You're not going to stop and read it, but you know something important happened there once. And that's how it feels with all the traffic that zooms by constantly. It's just another historic landmark on the way to D.C. But I don't think that's what God intended. I don't think that's what God designed the church with a capital C building to be. This building of living stones was meant to be more than just a historic landmark, a window into yesteryear. And if you go to the other end of that spectrum, I think you'd be equally wrong. We aren't some weird kind of gentrification either. The church isn't supposed to be that. The church isn't something that always reinvents itself to try and fit in with the new neighbors. This collection of living stones isn't in the business of tearing itself down with each new generation so that it can be built into something that looks more shiny and new. That's not what these living stones were called to be. Though I do admit that sometimes it might look and feel that way. Yet there's too much tradition. There's too much that stands the test of time. There's too much timeless, absolute truth for us to be some sort of gentrified building. We're not something new built on top of the ruins of something old. That's not what it is either. And we aren't a government building authorized for government use. The church was not built to carry out political agendas, though that doesn't stop people from trying from time to time. Foundations get confused. And the church isn't some sort of public use facility either. It's not available for rent by anyone who wants to use it for whatever they want to use it for. None of these types of buildings really seem to fit with this living stones of the body of Christ and what they've been built to do. That just, the function doesn't seem to match the design. That's the disconnect here. And truthfully, I can think of only one type of building that really fits the metaphor to the fullest. A monument. The church with a capital C, the people of God, these living stones have been assembled around the cornerstone that is Jesus into a monument to the mighty acts of God. Monuments are weird things. They seem to be important. We put a lot of money into upkeep, into maintenance, into keeping them looking nice, but they really don't serve any sort of function besides decorative. I mean, often that's how it feels, right? There's no point in going inside of a monument. You just kind of look at it, upon it. It's just, it stands there. Now, by definition, a monument serves as a memorial to a person or event. I find that definition rather useless because memorial and monument are synonyms, so you're kind of defining the word with its cousin, and that's not very helpful. It's a structure that stands for the sole purpose of reminding others what has happened. And that's exactly how Peter describes the church here in chapter 2, especially verse 9. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, in order that you might proclaim the mighty acts of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Pick a sermon metaphor out of this text. It doesn't matter which one you want to pick on it. You can pick on chosen race, royal priesthood, holy nation, God's own people, monument, whatever you want to call it. The point stays the same. The function stays the same. Your function as living stones built into some sort of structure is to proclaim the mighty acts of him who called you out of darkness into marvelous light. The church, capital C, not just this congregation, but globally, is a monument built of living stones that stand to proclaim the mighty deeds of God, who called us out of darkness and into God's own marvelous light. And as a monument, the church stands as a beacon of hope for those who remember God's mighty deeds from years before and who can still anticipate the things that God will do in the future, both near and far. We remind the world of what God has done to give them hope of what God is yet to do. It's no different than any of the monuments just up the road. Those monuments stand to give you hope of what is coming in the future because of the sacrifices what have been done in the past. Those mighty deeds of the past serve as a gentle reminder of hope for the future. They all do. The church is no different. As a monument, the church stands to declare the mighty deeds of God into the face of an ever-growing amnesia and apathy of the world. The world may wish and try its hardest to forget God and move on without God, to kill God and start over. And the church is a standing reminder and a testament, a witness to the power, to the love, to the mercy of God. And no matter how far the world may try to run away and to get away from God, that monument of church, of living stones built around the cornerstone that is Christ, serves as a marker to guide the world back to God. Because one day they're going to want to come home. Just like the prodigal son who ran away, one day he'd wanted to come back. And the church serves as that guide back to God that says, remember when God did these things? We haven't forgotten over here. And on a smaller scale, locally, as I think of the people of God built by living stones into a monument of God's mighty deeds and mercy, I realized that that's what this particular congregation has always been. And I think that's why it was held so high on a pedestal by so many. Through all the stories and all the memories I've heard of the Arlington Church of Christ over the years, it's always stood as a monument in the memory of those who have passed through here. A monument and testament to the love of God for those who travel through, who pass through. It's been your legacy. It's been your reputation. It's been what you stand for. What other word would you call such a building besides monument? What other word would you use to describe the impact of that on the lives of all these people other than monumental? I find that poetic, that this church has become a monument in its own right to so many who have come and gone, as it stands just a few miles down the road from all the other monuments. And perhaps I have a unique perspective as someone who came here knowing those stories and someone who has been here to see those stories. I feel a little bit removed from time objectively to see the monument for what it is. And perhaps I have no other goal this morning than to remind you all of the importance of your participation in that story, to be a monument of God's love to those who come and go. And perhaps some of you are feeling that power of the reminder of this church. I hope you are. I know I have. There was a story I was told a long time ago that I didn't understand until I had to understand it the hard way. Sometimes in life, you just can't find any words to pray anymore. And it's in those dark moments that you go to church because everyone there can pray for you. Not pray for what you're going through, but pray in your stead, in your absence, to give you the words whenever you have none to give. Sometimes you go to church because you are so empty that you have nothing else to offer God. But the church and its praise of God refuels you. Even though the praise is directed at God, it somehow reinvigorates you. Sometimes you go to the monument because you have no hope and you need to remember that there could still be hope. Sometimes you look upon a monument and you see the lives of all those who have come and gone before and the sacrifices they have made because you need to remember the cost of what it is that brought you here. Of course, the church is a monument. How could it be anything else when week after week we come to a monument of table to remember the sacrifice of Christ, to find hope for the future? Monument and memorial are two words that share a lot in common. We often describe this table as memorial, but it also stands as monument. Just as the church does, built of living stones that individually might not look all that impressive, but when you put them together, creates something that gives the rest of the world hope and the ability to keep going. And more than that, a monument that stands to testify to the power and mercy of God in the face of a world full of other people claiming power and other people abusing mercy. And this table, as much as this church, as much as this congregation, as much as the church with a capital C, stands as a monument to God's love, found in no place better than the death of his own son on a cross. The memorial that becomes a monument to give hope to the rest of the world. I doubt any of you decided to come to church this morning to become a monument. But I do need you to go home knowing that that's what you are, at least for a time. At least for a little while, for someone, your life stands individually and collectively as part of the capital C church as a testament to the power of God. And that's a big burden to carry, but it's a great joy of responsibility to testify to the mercy of God to the rest of the world when they're so desperate to hear it. So maybe you didn't wake up feeling that responsibility this morning, but please, I beg of each of you, come to this table, come to this monument, and take that responsibility home. Because each of you truly are a living sacrifice and a living stone meant to testify to the power of God, to proclaim it boldly into the face of the world, to declare that through the sacrifice of his Son, we used to be a people without mercy, but now we are a people of mercy. A monument to mercy. Let's stand and sing.